The Seven Sisters Cliffs are located at part of the southern edge of the South Downs National Park. The park covers some 621 square miles and stretches from Eastbourne in the east to Winchester in the west. The South Downs Way between the two is 100 miles long and can be traversed by foot, or on a horse, or by bike. So let's talk about chalk. What most of us know is that chalk is introduced to us at an early age in school, and then in later life we learn to appreciate its beauty as it makes up many of our cliffs on the southeast coast. Whilst we consider chalk to be a rock, it had its beginning as a microscopic plankton called coccolith. As with crude oil, it's based on millions of tiny life forms that died and their skeletons sank to the sea floor. Over millions of years, the creatures solidified and hardened, forming the chalk we know today. It was formed in what is now known as the late Cretaceous period, Creta being the Latin for chalk. This all happened between 60 and 100 million years ago. The reason that the chalk of the Seven Sisters is so brilliantly white is that it must have been formed in quite deep water, where there were no muds or silts to spoil the colouring. It is reckoned that sea levels were some 200 metres higher in those days. When the world warmed and the glaciers began to melt, the flow through the South Downs created the valleys between the cliffs, and so these beautiful landscapes were formed. The Seven Sisters are a series of chalk cliffs located between Cuckmere Haven and Beachy Head.
So from Birling Gap this way, these are the Seven Sisters, and everybody thinks they're called the Seven Sisters because there's 7. But we might think there's 6.
Yes.
Which confuses issues a little bit, but we'll come on to that a bit further down. The area in front of us is Cuckmere Haven, and therefore we've got the cottages at Cuckmere here, the Coast Guard, well, Cuckmere Coast Guard cottages.
I've got 7 now, if not 8.
Do we all agree there might be 8?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's bonkers, isn't it?
Yes.
We thought there were 6 a minute ago.
Yes.
In fact, there are actually 8 sisters these days. A new one was formed through erosion, and Beachy Head is not one of them, as many people think. So, much to learn. They've all got their own special names. From east to west, we're looking at the West Hill Brow is the first one, followed by Bailey's Hill, Flat Hill, Flagstaff Point, which is the new sister, Brass Point, Rough Brow, Short Brow, and Haven Brow. Seven Sisters got their name because they resembled the wimple of a nun's headdress back in the old days, and that's how it happened. And apparently, seamen were very pleased to see them when they got near shore. The French coast too shares some beautiful white cliffs. They were once all joined together as part of the chalk stone. Theirs are called the Côte d'Albâtre or Alabaster Coast, and they're eroding at pretty much the same rate over there. We're actually growing further apart from France as each day passes, although in a very small way. Which brings us to the overall subject of erosion. The way that erosion happens is that the constant wave movement undercuts the cliff until it becomes top heavy and falls. This effect is exacerbated by wind and rain. Chalk is so soft that it almost melts into the water. Once you've had a major cliff fall, that area goes from being an active area to a passive one. The means that the rubble from the fall helps protect the remaining cliff until that too is washed away. And sometimes a major fall can be a few years of erosion in one go. This is Birling Gap in August 2023. And those houses that you can see in front of you, of which there are 4, we're now moving to the last one. And you can see just how close it is to the cliff edge. And as we approach it, you will see there are a line of what appears to be white stones in the back garden. Now, whether that's a sort of alarm point for further action, I do not know, but it could well be. And you can see there's probably 3 or 4 meters there. Now on the screen, you can see when the last one came down in 2014. The picture you can see on screen now is from approximately 1906, and the circle represents where the house we've just looked at is or was in 1906. As you can see, I would estimate there were like 50 or 60 meters have gone since then, which at the 0.6 meter per year over 100 year approximately is about the right amount. What you're looking at now used to be the Birling Gap Hotel, but is now the visitor office for the National Trust and also the cafe. You can see that there is very little left in terms of the Birling Gap, but it's still a very popular place. And these stairs that take you down to the beach, a lot of people still like to spend a day on the beach down here. The stairs are metallic and they're actually manoeuvrable to the extent that they can be moved back, which they will need to be every so often. And there ahead of you can see a small fall of the chalk. So this is the sort of situation at Birling Gap where the National Trust are refusing to try and protect the houses. And frankly, it's a waste of time, really, because you're only ever going to protect them for a short period of time, and it's going to cost an absolute fortune. The general policy for the government along the whole of this coast is to let nature take its course. And for most of it, it doesn't affect many people anymore. These Coast Guard cottages were sold off to the public around 1952, but no one could pretend that people didn't know what was happening with the erosion at that point in time. Now, I found an old article from 1904 in the local Eastbourne Gazette, which talked about staying away from the cliff and not building anything there because it was too risky. I mean, at one point they were talking about having an electric railway that went past there to take advantage of all the tourism and traffic going up there. So I think we have to accept that a lot of this stuff, within the next 20 to 40 years, there will be nothing left at Birling Gap, apart from rough land and maybe, with a bit of luck, the stairs that can still take you down to the beach if that's what you'd like to do.
That they're removing the sovereign light tower, which is way down on the horizon over here, is because they've made this light brighter. So this light you can see for 25 miles away.
Wow.
So historically lighthouses would have warned people of danger. Now, because of the sophistication of all the technology, they're almost used just to prove to yourself that you are where you think you are. So if you were 10 miles out to sea and you could see this light, you could work out what angle you were from the light, so what bearing you were, and therefore you could work out an approximate position. So if you had another light further down, you could join those two lines. An organisation called Trinity House came to paint the lighthouse. It's always been red and white, and they came and they were going to paint it white. Everyone was like, you can't paint it white, it's red and white. They said, no, it's too expensive to paint it red and white. We're just going to paint it white. And everyone was like, no, you can't. They're like, why? And they said, well, if it's white, you wouldn't see it against the cliff. And so they said, well, if you could see the cliff, you don't need to see the lighthouse. And they were like, oh, okay. They said, well, what about at night? And they said, well, that's why we put a big light on the top. And then they said, well, what about all the red and white striped lighthouse tat we're trying to sell in our shops in Eastbourne? And they were like, no. So the good folk of Eastbourne raised £30,000.
Wow.
Only for the red bit.
Wow.
Oh, I thought they'd left the red bit because it looks much more faded.
Yeah, well, the top red bit they painted last week, coincidentally.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
But yeah, they painted the red and white, well, a red stripe on there. So now every year there's a charity walk that's done by the Rotary group in Eastbourne, and when occasionally in the year the tide is so low, you can walk all the way around this side as well. So the RNLI come out. May, that's
For the
exactly
purpose of the
right.
camera,
Yeah,
I'd just like to say that the driver is now acting as a conductor, so nobody's steering the boat.
Oh,